Welcome, dear dreamer, to Driftwood stories, where ancient footsteps echo softly through time, and the breath of gods still stirs the olive leaves. Tonight we follow the winds to a cave bathed in starlight, where a child is born not with a cry, but with a chuckle. This is the story of Hermes, the silver-tongued, light-footed god of messages and mischief, who danced before he could crawl, and turned even the mightiest gods toward laughter and light. So rest now. Let your mind drift with the clouds, and your thoughts grow feather-light. We are about to walk the ancient skies on winged sandals that leave no trace. The wind is waiting. Let it carry us. Chapter 1. Whispers at Dawn. Before the world had found its rhythm, before mortals carved names into stone, the stars watched over a sleeping hill in Arcadia, where silence breathed like a lullaby through the pines. And there, hidden in a shadowed cave, a goddess gave birth to the wind. Her name was Maya, eldest of the Pleiades, daughter of Atlas and the quiet sky. She lived far from Olympus, not for lack of power, but for love of peace. She dwelled in solitude, beneath moss-covered rock and golden branches, tending the silence with care, until one night, beneath a sky brushed in silver, a new cry echoed, not sharp or shrill, but soft, mischievous, like the rustling of a breeze through olive leaves. Hermes had arrived, born not with thunder, but with laughter. The cave grew brighter in his presence, not with firelight, but with a curious flickering shimmer, as though the air itself knew it must move differently around him. Maya, exhausted but smiling, watched as her newborn son wriggled with impossible energy. Already his eyes darted about the cave, as if noting the way stones stacked themselves, all way light pooled beside the mouth of the cave. She reached to swaddle him, but he had already slipped free. He did not crawl. He stood, wobbly but steady, as though gravity was merely a suggestion. And then he walked. By the time the sun's first rays touched the cave, Hermes had gathered reeds from the stream, woven them into a rough pipe, and blown a melody so sweet that the birds hushed to hear it. Maya blinked slowly from her bedding of soft leaves. "Rest, little one," she whispered, but Hermes was already outside, feet light on the dew-laced grass, eyes bright with mischief and wonder. There are many births in the world of gods. Some come in storms, some arrive wrapped in prophecy, some are forgotten. But Hermes, he came with purpose in his bones and joy in his breath. He did not wait to be told what he was. He wandered, not far, just to the edge of the hills, where the horizon opened like a painted scroll, and there, in that quiet dawn, he saw them, Apollo's sacred cattle. Dozens of golden beasts, hooves shining, tails flicking in lazy rhythm. Hermes tilted his head. He had never seen a cow before, but he had already decided. He would borrow them. The mischief was not cruel. He padded silently down the slope, his small feet making no sound. He hummed as he walked, a tune made of dawnlight and dew. And when he reached the cattle, He greeted them with a bow. "Good beasts," he said, "how fine you are! Would you like an adventure?" And whether they understood his words or his tone, they followed him, one by one. But Hermes, ever the trickster, was not content to simply lead. He turned their hooves backward, with deft hands and a grin. He reversed their tracks in the earth, so that when Apollo came searching, he would find only confusion. Then, satisfied, Hermes guided the golden herd into a hidden glade wrapped in laurel and shadow. He tucked them in as one might children, spoke softly to the last calf, and gave it a kiss upon the brow. By the time he returned to the cave, Maya was just rising. She looked down at her son, now pretending to sleep, a faint whistle of reed pipe by his side, his face innocent and utterly unconvincing. She said nothing. Mothers of gods know better than to question what they already understand. And somewhere beyond the hills, the sun rose brighter. Apollo stirred. The cattle were gone, and the wind began to whisper the name of a newborn god, carried softly through the branches. Hermes. Chapter 2. The clever newborn. The sun had barely crossed the treetops when Apollo arrived in Arcadia. He came on foot this time. No flaming chariot, no trailing light, for the theft had vexed him. His sacred cattle were missing, golden-horned, blessed with sunlight and song. They had vanished in the night without a sound. And worse, their hoofprints led backward. Apollo, god of truth, music, and order, stood in a meadow of twisted signs, his bright brows furrowed. "This is no mortal's doing," he muttered. "This is the work of a trickster," and his eyes turned toward the hills, toward a cave shrouded in pine and peace. Inside, Hermes lay nestled in a blanket of moss and fleece. He hummed softly to himself, a tune made from reeds and curiosity, fingers dancing lightly along the curve of his makeshift lyre. It was no simple toy. Crafted from a hollow tortoise shell, its strings were made from sheep gut and wisdom not yet taught. He had found the shell earlier that day, lying quietly beneath a laurel tree, and in the space of an hour he had given it voice. When he played, the cave filled with golden sound, tones that shimmered like dawn on river water, melodies that seemed to speak in more than words. Even Maya paused in her movements, held still by the aching beauty of the boy's song. "What do you call it?" she whispered. Hermes blinked, surprised by the question. "A lyre," he said with a smile, "because it tells stories, even if they're not quite true." It was then that the cave's entrance darkened. Apollo stepped in, radiant even in fury. The temperature shifted. The birds grew quiet. Hermes stopped playing. The lyre rested softly in his lap. Apollo's voice, when it came, was calm, but carried the weight of 1,000 choral hymns. "Child, I seek the one who stole my cattle." Hermes looked up with wide eyes, the picture of infantile innocence. "I have been here," he said sweetly. "Swaddled and sleepy, I cannot walk." Apollo raised an eyebrow. "And yet I hear music crafted by hands more clever than most gods ever become." Hermes shrugged. "I was bored." Apollo stepped closer. He towered above the child, light radiating from his shoulders. "I am the god of reason," he said. of prophecy, of truth. I see through illusion." Hermes stood, small, barefoot, wrapped in a simple cloth, yet utterly unafraid. "Then you already know the answer," he said simply. "So why ask?" For a heartbeat there was silence. And then Apollo laughed, a single bright note, like sunlight catching in a river bend. "You are bold," he said. Hermes grinned. "I am curious, but why the cattle?" Hermes tilted his head. "I wanted to see if I could—" "And the reversed hoof prints?" "A gift," Hermes said, "to make the game last longer." Apollo stared at the boy. This child who stood in front of him like a riddle in human form. "You are not a thief," Apollo said. Hermes nodded. "Not truly. You are something else." Hermes bowed. "I will return your cattle," he said, "but first let me offer a trade." And with that he picked up the lyre and played softly, not for performance, for peace, a song of mourning, of curiosity blooming, of a world waiting to be wandered. Apollo closed his eyes. He who had mastered every note of every harp, who had composed songs for the birth of cities, felt tears gather behind his lids. When the final note faded, he opened his eyes. "That is divine." Hermes offered him the lyre. "Then it is yours." A silence passed between them, not empty, but full of something new, respect, recognition, even affection. Apollo placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. "Some day they will sing of this, of the god who tricked the sun and gifted him song." Hermes beamed. "And what will they call me?" Apollo smiled. "They will call you messenger, guide, thief of boundaries, friend of roads, the silver-tongued one." Hermes nodded. "And brother?" Apollo hesitated, then nodded once, firmly. "And brother?" Outside the wind stirred. A breeze rustled the olive leaves. The game was over, but the story had just begun. Chapter 3, A Lute Made of Moonlight. When Hermes gave the lyre to Apollo, the world shifted slightly, not with thunder or tremor, but with music. Something had changed. For gods, it is rare to give freely, rarer still to give something that cannot be taken back. But Hermes had done so, without condition, without fear, and Apollo, sun-chaser, harp-master, god of harmony, had felt the sincerity in the gift. He cradled the instrument as if it were a living thing. And when he played it, even the wind leaned in to listen. The gods heard of it quickly, as they always do. Whispers rose from the grass, travelled by bird and breeze, until Olympus stirred with curiosity. A newborn who sings stars into silence, a trickster who walks before he crawls, a child of Maya, born in secret, gifting gods their own breath in song. Zeus heard the rumours and smiled, for though the king of the gods ruled with thunder, he had always admired cleverness, especially when it came without cruelty. And Hermes? He was already on the move. He didn't linger in the cave, nor bask in praise. Instead, he wandered through valleys and over stones, picking up bits of the world, like a bird gathering threads for a nest. He plucked vines and wove them into ropes. He whittled wood into walking sticks that hummed softly in his hands. He carved flutes from reeds and played them to sleeping sheep. Wherever he walked, the world seemed to follow. as though it too was curious where he might go next. One evening, beneath a sky powdered with stars, Hermes sat by a stream and watched the moon ripple in the water. It was not enough for him to see it. He wanted to hear it. He reached into his pouch of oddments, a pearl from a bird's gullet, a sliver of polished bone, a string pulled from a spider's web at dawn. Piece by piece he built a new instrument. Not the lyre. He had given that away. This one was longer, softer in voice. It curved like a river bend. Its strings trembled at the brush of wind. He played, and the moonlight listened. It was not a song of tricks or riddles. It was a lullaby. Notes floated like drifting petals, each one holding a wish too gentle for words. A fox curled at his feet. Owls tilted their heads in rhythm. Even the shadows stopped to sway. It was a music that did not ask to be heard, only to be felt. And far away, in the marble halls of Olympus, Hera paused in her pacing. "What is that sound?" she murmured, but no one could answer, because only the open-hearted could hear it from afar. Hermes played until the moon dipped low, until the stars blinked drowsily, and even the breeze whispered, "Enough for now." He set the instrument aside and whispered to it, "You are not for the gods, you are for those in between." He wrapped it in cloth, tucked it into a hollow tree, and let it sleep, for Hermes did not cling. He created, he gave, and he moved on. By now Apollo had begun composing with the lyre, grand hymns, heroic tales, golden harmonies that soared. But even he, for all his talent, could not match the softness Hermes summoned. His songs were divine. Hermes's were something else, something closer, like the warmth of hands before words, or the moment just before sleep, when dreams begin to hum. It wasn't long before Hermes was seen not as just a trickster, but a bringer of beauty. He spoke in riddles, yes, but also in music, and the gods, who had always spoken in absolutes, began to wonder. Could truth be playful? Could wisdom arrive wrapped in laughter? Hermes seemed to think so. And for the first time, Olympus began to lean forward, not to command, but to listen. One night Maia asked her son, "Why do you make things you don't keep?" Hermes tilted his head. "Because they are not mine, once they've been heard," and he kissed her cheek, and left before dawn. The world was ready for messengers, for bridges, for silver tongues that did not lie, but danced around the edges of truth, until it revealed something gentler. And Hermes? He was already walking the sky's edge, his sandals barely brushing the ground. Chapter 4, Facing the Sun God. The sun rose early the next morning, brighter than usual, as if stretching itself over the hills of Arcadia with purpose. Apollo was coming back, not in anger. That flame had cooled, but with curiosity and something stranger, respect. It is not common for gods to be surprised. And yet Hermes had surprised him. With theft, yes, but also with laughter, with music, with a heart so open even a sun god had blinked. Hermes sat near a grove of fig trees, his sandals off, toes dipped in cool stream water, humming to himself a song about ducks and distant stars. When the air shimmered gold, he looked up, and Apollo stood there, radiant and calm. A cloak of light about his shoulders, the lyre, his lyre, resting on his back. "I have come," said Apollo, "to understand you better." Hermes tilted his head. "Why not bring wine?" Apollo smiled faintly. "I did," and from behind him a satchel of sunlight opened, revealing a flask carved from crystal, glowing faintly with nectar from the high vineyards of Olympus. Hermes accepted it with a nod. He poured a little into a carved horn cup, then handed it to Apollo. "To understanding," he said, eyes glinting. "To restraint," replied Apollo, though his voice was already lighter. They drank. "What is your aim?" Apollo asked at last, reclining beside the stream. "You moved so swiftly, but toward what?" Hermes plucked a reed and turned it in his fingers. "Movement is the aim," he said. "I am not a sun that must rise, nor a moon that must retreat. I am the wind between them." Apollo studied him. "So, you are change?" Hermes smiled. "I am between things, the breath before a word, the laugh before forgiveness, the pause between question and answer." It was then that a rustle stirred the grove. A mortal, a shepherd boy, barefoot and bewildered, wandered through the trees. He did not see the gods at first, only the stream, only the soft grass beneath his feet. Then he looked up and saw them. He froze, mouth open, breath caught. Apollo raised a hand. "Peace," he said gently. The boy dropped to his knees, trembled, but Hermes was already standing. He approached the mortal, knelt beside him, and whispered, "Would you like to see something strange?" The boy, wide-eyed, nodded. Hermes reached into his satchel, pulled forth a bronze coin, flipped it once, and it became a butterfly, gleaming, wings edged in firelight and moon glow. The boy gasped, and then laughed, soft and unguarded. Hermes gave him the coin. "It won't stay that way," he said, "but it will remember." The boy wandered on, and the grove held silence for a while. Apollo looked to Hermes. "You treat mortals as equals." Hermes shrugged. "They forget less than gods think. And do you enjoy them?" "Not all," Hermes grinned, "but most. Especially the foolish. They remind me of myself. They sat for hours, 2 gods, one radiant and noble, one barefoot and wily, and shared stories, not boasts, not thunder, just stories of things they had seen and things they wished to see. And somewhere in that sharing, Apollo reached behind his back, lifted the lyre and held it out. Hermes blinked. "You are returning it?" "No," said Apollo, "I am offering it, in kind." He placed the instrument beside Hermes, then reached into the satchel again, this time drawing a slender rod, carved from olive wood and wound with golden thread. 2 serpents curled around its length, sleeping in perfect balance. "Take this," he said, "from me." Hermes touched the staff. It pulsed softly, like language, like breath. "This is a caduceus," said Apollo. "Not a weapon, a guide, a peacemaker, one who walks between." Hermes stood slowly, the staff in his hand, and he felt it, not power, but purpose. He looked at Apollo. "I think we are friends now," he said. Apollo nodded. "Brothers, perhaps?" Hermes chuckled. And all this from a herd of backwards walking cattle. Above them the sun shifted westward. Even gods must move with time. Apollo rose. "I must return to the golden hall." Hermes twirled the staff once, light trailing from its tip. "And I," he said, "must find a road no one has walked yet." Apollo clasped his shoulder. "Zeus will call for you soon. He sees what you are becoming." Hermes looked up at the trees, at the space between leaf and light. "I hope he brings sandals." And with that they parted, one to the high throne of Olympus, the other to the open world. Chapter 5. Messenger of the Skies. High atop Olympus, where the clouds bowed in reverence and the air shimmered with unspoken thought, Zeus sat upon his throne of stormlight and marble. He watched the world with eyes like molten skies. He knew the weight of prophecy, the pull of power, and the value of speed. And on this day he summoned Hermes. The boy god arrived not in splendour, but with sandals in one hand and a smile in the other. He wore a simple cloak the colour of wind-tossed ash, and around his staff the serpents stirred ever so slightly, not hissing but dreaming. Zeus looked down at him, his great beard curling like thunderclouds. "You move lightly," he said. Hermes shrugged. "The world is more interesting when you don't press too hard." Zeus chuckled. "I've heard you've walked with mortals, made music with the sun, and led shadows into laughter." Hermes tilted his head. "I go where silence needs a voice." Then Zeus raised his hand, and in it, sandals, not just any sandals. These were forged from star thread and breath, laced with swiftness, feathered with light. They shimmered not with gold, but with motion, like the idea of travel made real. He held them out. "For you," said Zeus. "Wear these and the winds will know your name." Hermes took them gently. He bowed, low but not submissively. "I will walk carefully," he said, "and run wisely." Thus he became the messenger of the skies. Not a warrior, not a judge, a bridge. Hermes did not rule. He carried messages between gods, between mortals, between thought and form. He moved swiftly now, but never rushed. He whispered dreams to sleeping kings, delivered riddles wrapped in starlight to wandering poets, and ferried olive branches between warring cities. He never stayed long. He never repeated the same phrase twice. Yet wherever he passed, things softened. Arguments paused. Doors opened. Letters arrived at just the right moment. The gods tested him. Ares sent him to deliver a sealed scroll to a titan deep in the mountains, but the path was guarded by harpies of confusion. Hermes smiled at them, spoke to them in their own disjointed tongue, and made them laugh until they wept. The scroll was delivered unopened. Athena tasked him with carrying a question, not an answer, to the oracle at Delphi. Hermes bowed and returned the next day with a pebble that sang. When Athena held it to her ear, she closed her eyes and smiled. The question had found its answer. He did not use brute strength. He did not carry a sword. His weapons were clarity and kindness. His shield wit, his armour, curiosity. And so the world began to know him, not in statues, not in thunder, but in stories. A shepherd whispered of a stranger who tied his broken sandal with silver grass. A queen dreamt of her lost child and woke with a note in her palm. He walks beside me. A dying man felt his breath still, and a soft voice say, "Come, the road is short." Zeus watched all this from Olympus, and in his great hall he added Hermes' name to the tapestry of order, not below, not above, between. One morning Hermes sat on the edge of a cloud, legs dangling over the curve of the world. The sandals hummed gently, sensing he might leap at any moment. He looked down upon the earth, so full of noise and song and silence. He could feel the words moving, from lovers to beloveds, from gods to mortals, from memory to myth. And he whispered, "I will carry them all, not because he must, but because he could." And somewhere below, a child spoke a truth they had never dared, and felt lighter. Somewhere a warrior stepped away from battle, not knowing why. Somewhere an old letter was opened, and forgiveness bloomed. Hermes had passed, and the sky was listening. Chapter 6. Wings on the Wind. The sandals did not make sound when they touched the earth. They left no prints, no path, only a sense, soft and lingering, that something kind had just passed by. Hermes wore them with grace, though he often walked barefoot still, preferring to feel the dust and dew of the world. But when he ran, he ran with the wind, not against it, with it. The air curled around him like a friend, lifting him just enough that he skimmed the world like a feather on an updraft. The gods looked down and marvelled. Mortals looked up and wondered. For Hermes did not stay in the heavens. He moved through the in-between, from mountain-top to marketplace, from battlefield to cradle, from temple to tavern. Wherever he was needed, he arrived. He delivered messages, yes, but he also brought more subtle things. He carried luck in his left palm and cleverness in his right. He whispered inventions into the ears of tinkers. He nudged poets awake in their dreams. He taught merchants to smile as they bartered, and thieves to leave behind more than they took. Hermes was not a god of rules. He was a god of rhythm, of timing, of doors left ajar just enough for wonder to walk through. One day he danced across the rooftops of Thebes, barely a shimmer to the eye. Below, a boy struggled to speak, his words tangled like vines. Hermes paused, touched the boy's shoulder, and whispered a single sound. The boy blinked, then sang his name. From that day forward, he spoke fluently, softly, but always with purpose. Another morning, Hermes sat with an old woman by a well that no longer ran. She did not see him arrive. He asked her nothing. He simply held her hand. She wept, not because of sorrow, but because something in her heart had been carried away. When she looked up, he was gone, and the well began to bubble again. There were darker paths too. Hermes walked among thieves, but not to punish. He taught them grace, how to take without cruelty, how to vanish without harm. He reminded them, even shadows must serve the light. And many listened, because Hermes did not command. He invited. The gods sent him often. Hera, when her temper cooled, trusted him to soothe feuding temples. Ares, despite his fury, respected the swiftness with which Hermes resolved conflict before swords were drawn. Even Demeter, in her grief, let him carry a message to her daughter, Persephone. A whisper wrapped in petals and patience. Hermes flew where others could not because of power, but because of trust. He crossed the boundaries of things, between life and death, sky and soil, truth and dream, and through it all, he never lost his laughter. He chuckled at riddles only he understood. He grinned when birds flew beside him. Matching his pace, he told stories to trees, and trees, in turn, bowed just a little more when he passed. His joy was not in being known, but in knowing everything he touched had moved, even slightly, toward balance. One evening, as stars gathered early in the east, Hermes rested on the shoulder of a great statue. Below, a city murmured with music and meals, arguments and amends. He watched it all, and sighed happily. The wind curled around him like a question. "Are you tired?" it asked. Hermes smiled. "No," he whispered. "Just ready." For he had walked long enough on earth. Now the deeper paths called. Paths no god dared tread often, paths that led not to altars or applause, but to silence, to shadow, to rest. Hermes stood. The wind tugged at his cloak. His staff shimmered faintly, and he stepped from the statue into the sky, not to rise, to descend. Chapter 7, Guide of Souls. Not all roads run beneath the sky. Some run deeper, beneath roots and rivers, beneath temples and tombs, beneath even memory. These are the roads of the dead, and Hermes, light-footed and fearless, walked them too. The underworld was not a place of fire, not here. It was shadowed, yes, but not cruel. Its halls were carved from stone, older than the stars. Its rivers whispered in forgotten tongues, and its silence was sacred. Most gods avoided this realm. It was still, and stillness frightened them. But Hermes was not afraid, because Hermes did not come to conquer death. He came to guide. They called him Psychopomp, the soul shepherd. When a mortal died, if they had lived with a spark of kindness, a flicker of longing, or simply a whisper left unsaid, Hermes would arrive. Not in thunder, not in smoke, but as a breeze, a presence, a gentle sound just beside the ear. And he would say, "Come, I will walk with you." He never hurried them. Some souls needed time. Some wept, remembering gardens they'd never tended, or laughter they'd left behind. Hermes would sit with them, tell them riddles, play them a song they didn't know they knew, and when they were ready, he would offer his hand, and the journey would begin. The path wound downward, through forests that no longer grew, and caves where echoes had forgotten their source. Hermes spoke often on the road, not with sermons, but with stories. Once a baker gave bread to a stranger, he'd say, and that stranger became a god in disguise. Or, a child once sang to a stone, and the stone remembered its name. The souls would listen, and slowly they would feel lighter, not because they forgot life, but because they were being remembered. At the edge of the river Styx, Hermes would pause. The ferryman waited, his boat etched with the names of centuries. Hermes always paid the toll, even when the soul had none. He'd pull a coin from nowhere, a gift from a king, a trinket lost in a market, a token woven from moonlight and grace. He'd place it gently in the ferryman's hand, and the journey would continue. Sometimes Persephone met him on the other side, the queen of shadows, whose heart still carried the scent of spring. She and Hermes would walk the last stretch together, not as rulers, as comforters, as kindnesses in a place where kindness often wandered alone. There were stories of Hermes laughing in the underworld, not mockingly, but warmly. He told the souls jokes so old they became new again. He reminded them of the joy they once felt, when rain surprised a window, or when someone remembered their name. He brought light, not to banish the dark, but to make it gentler. Hades, the lord of the dead, watched from his obsidian throne. He never stopped Hermes, never questioned him, because Hermes did not trespass. He guided, and in doing so, he gave the underworld its one great mercy. Hope, not hope of return, but hope that even in ending, there is someone who walks beside you. Above, the living rarely knew. They did not see the boy god who knelt beside their dying beds, who whispered soft farewells, who closed eyes not with finality, but with peace. But sometimes, just sometimes, they left behind a feeling that someone had been there. A feather on the window-sill, a coin on the floor, a scent of fresh wind, though the room was still. Hermes had passed, and when his sandals touched the world again, he left no dust, only silence that hummed, only paths that no longer feared being walked. Chapter 8. Sleep beneath the silver sky. Night came softly to the world, not like a curtain drawn, but like the hush of breath before sleep, like twilight slipping gently across shoulders, and high above the sleeping lands, Hermes walked, not quickly now, not on errand or task, but in rhythm. His silver sandals whispered across the sky, barely stirring the stars. He moved between dreams. He passed over a sleeping village, where a child clutched a worn doll and smiled in sleep. He dipped low through olive trees and left behind a breeze that smelled of cedar and warm bread. He perched briefly on the rim of the moon, watched the earth turn slowly beneath him, and sighed, not with weariness, but with contentment. Hermes, the messenger, the trickster, the guide, the wind-walker. He had been called many things, but here, in the quiet of night, he was simply himself. Not a god, not a symbol, just a soul with silver on his feet and light in his hands. The stars watched him as he passed. They remembered his laughter. How once, long ago, he'd tied constellations together with invisible thread, just to make the moon laugh. They twinkled softly now in greeting. He tipped his head in return. "Still glowing?" he asked them. A twinkle flickered brighter in reply. He smiled, He paused above a distant field, where an old man lay beneath the open sky. The man's breath was slow, his hands still. Hermes crouched beside him, though no one could see, and touched his forehead gently. "You've walked far," he whispered. "Well done." A faint breath escaped the man's lips, a final one, and as his soul rose like mist, Hermes took it gently by the hand. Together they began to walk, but this time he did not take him far. The soul paused to glance back, and Hermes said, "You are remembered." The soul smiled and passed on, light as dawn. When he returned to the sky, Hermes sat for a while on a beam of moonlight. Below, the world slept. Even the gods, in their marbled halls, dreamed dreams of when the earth was young. Hermes pulled his cloak tighter, not from cold, there was no cold here, but because it felt good to hold something close. He looked down at his hands. They bore no scars, but they had carried sorrow. They bore no jewels, but they had shaped peace. They had written no laws, but they had opened doors where none had been before. He thought of all the words he had spoken, some true, some bent like reeds in the breeze. He thought of the songs he had given away, of the roads he had walked that no one else dared. And then he breathed in deeply the scent of sleep, the hush of dreams, the promise of morning, and he began to hum, not a full song, just a thread of melody, light as silk on wind, a lullaby for the world, the kind you don't remember in the morning, but wake from with peace in your chest. Birds tucked beaks beneath wings, leaves stilled, even the stars seemed to sway in rhythm, and Hermes sang them to sleep. All of them, not because it was his duty, but because it was his gift. And when at last he rose again into the upper dark, his sandals tracing gentle arcs through midnight, he left behind no trail, no echo, only rest, only dreams, only the sense that someone had just passed by, kind, light-footed and smiling. Sleep now, dear dreamer. The roads are watched, the words are safe, Hermes is near.